This investigation is getting weirder and weirder and more troublesome to me. You know, we lived through Watergate and the Iran-Contra matter and Clinton. I don't ever remember a private attorney for a president having his records seized with search warrants, his home searched, apparently now, a hotel where he and his family stay searched, as well as his office. Do you remember anything like this?
I've never seen a situation like this, Mark. The only thing I can fathom is that they're looking at Cohen as a criminal. Obviously, they wouldn't be doing this if they didn't think to get a search warrant, you have to have probable cause that there's evidence of crime. But the troubling thing is, and you have to know this when you start down this path, their theory, I would presume, is that if Trump and Cohen were in cahoots together in connection, say, with the Stormy Daniels payment in order to defeat the election, the campaign finance laws, then what they would say is that the so-called crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege applies, and basically there is no attorney-client privilege.
And they would have to make that argument. They would have to make that argument, correct?
I don't see how they would get around it. Otherwise, you have to set up this very, very elaborate process of Chinese wall or watertight compartment or whatever you want to call it to screen out all the attorney-client privilege stuff that's irrelevant to whatever it is that they're investigating. And I can't imagine that this would have been worth it to them unless they were obviously looking at the president as well.
Yes, and so let's just play this out a little bit, Andy McCarthy. So let's say they get what they expect. They're going to take out a president or try to take out a president over something like this? Don't prosecutors use their judgment in matters like this?
Well, Mark, I think judgments have been an interesting commodity in the last couple of years because I'm, as the trite-old saying goes, I'm old enough to remember when the attorney-client privilege in the Hillary Clinton emails investigation was reason enough not even to issue a subpoena or, in some instances, collect evidence from lawyers. And now it's no blockade to doing search warrants. And this isn't Mueller's or the government's maiden voyage in this investigation. In connection with the Manafort prosecution, they also forced an attorney to testify and give evidence against clients. So obviously it's a very different set of rules that applies to this investigation than applied to the Clinton investigation.
Just so everybody understand what you're talking about here, in the Hillary Clinton case, they didn't go seek a warrant based on probable cause in order to pierce the veil of attorney-client privilege. They themselves showed enormous restraint, didn't they? And they said, well, that's privilege, so we're not going there.
Yeah. In fact, Mark, I think what the scheme was at every critical juncture of that investigation, Mrs. Clinton, by the way, of course, is a Yale-educated lawyer herself, but she incorporated lawyers at every phase, whether it was getting, collecting emails off her server, deciding which ones to purge, which ones to safekeep. At every critical phase of the investigation, she injected lawyers. And then when it came time to either interview witnesses or collect evidence, they said, no, you can't do that. It's protected by the attorney-client privilege. And the Justice Department, which I think was really working more in cahoots than against that set of lawyers, honored pretty much all of those requests.
Who's Andrew Goldstein?
Andrew Goldstein, who I don't know personally, but I'm acquainted with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York because I worked there for almost 20 years. He was the head of the public corruption unit in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, which is the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. So when Preet Bharara was the U.S. Attorney, that gentleman whose name you just mentioned was the head of the public corruption unit, and he was then recruited to join Mueller's Gang of 17. So He's one of the lawyers on Mueller's staff.
Preet Bharara was hired by a former U.S. attorney. Who was that?
Preet Bharara was hired by Mary Jo White, and his first supervisor, at least one of his first supervisors in the U.S. Attorney's Office, was some old guy named McCarthy.
Was you?
Right.
Now, what's his relationship to Jim Comey?
I think they're very friendly. They I'm not sure if I think Preet was I think Preet was an assistant in the office when Jim was the U.S. attorney in Manhattan.
That's what I'm getting at. He worked for Comey at one point.
Yeah, he worked for me. He worked for Comey. He worked for everyone who was a supervisor in that office. But Comey was the U.S. attorney from about 2000, I want to say after 9/11 sometime, so 2001 into about end of 2002, 2003.
So Goldstein worked for Preet Bharara. Preet Bharara, right, at one point, obviously, worked under Comey.
Correct.
And now Goldstein works for Mueller, and Mueller does this referral of sorts to the Southern District, and you have to assume that the former head of public corruption at the Southern District is involved in this case, correct?
Well, you mean on the
referral?
You mean whoever the current head is?
Yes.
I would think that they would be looking at this as a public corruption case. I don't know, Mark. I think the interesting thing here is the Southern District did do, we'll all recall, a campaign finance case.
We're going to take a break. I want to get back. Hold on to your thought. But my question is, what is Mueller referring? I don't understand. They're referring over to the Southern District of New York. What would Mueller be referring over to the Southern District of New York? Not the Stormy Daniels matter. That's not even in his purview. We'll be right back. Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. And Andy McCarthy, they don't need a referral from the Justice Department to investigate matters related to the Stormy Daniels. What in the world would Mueller be referring to? Can we even contemplate?
Yeah, Mark, I think that as I understand the regs for special counsels and his appointment order, if he comes across, and it doesn't have to be that he necessarily discovers it, but if he's the lead lawyer on a subject or a person who's under investigation, and evidence of a crime that's unrelated to his jurisdiction comes up, he's basically got three choices. He can ignore it.
All right, let me just stop you there. I know that's not my point. My point is this: this has been in the public realm for a while. Their lawyer, Stormy Daniels' lawyer, has been all over the place, and it's playing out publicly. And if somebody wanted to investigate it, the Southern District can investigate it.
Well,
it doesn't need a referral from the special counsel, right? You got smart lawyers in there in the Southern District.
Well, they're capable of investigating it, but if you have an open matter where you have subjects of an investigation that are being investigated by another office, the usual thing would be to go to the Justice Department to resolve that. And if it came to Mueller in the first instance...
But why would it come to Mueller in the first instance? He's investigating Russia. He's investigating financial crimes. He's investigating 3,000 other things.
Yes, but as far as the Justice Department would be concerned, Cohen is the subject of his investigation. So if something came up somewhere along the line that had nothing to do with Mueller's investigation, but Cohen's name popped up in it, the Justice Department would not be unusual for the Justice Department to intervene in a situation like that to make sure prosecutors didn't step on each other's toes.
Isn't what's really going on here is two things. They wanted access to the attorney-client information, and they may see things related to quote-unquote Russia, whatever that means.
Right.
And also, they hope they can press this guy like they have a few other guys to get him to talk about Russia. Is that possible?
No, I think that's absolutely right. The question I think from Mueller and for PR purposes, he probably has to think about, do I want this to be do I want to be perceived as the Ken Starr investigation all over again? So I'm, supposed to be looking at Whitewater, and then I'm on to the Lewinsky case. But I think that by referring this to the Southern District, he gets the best of both worlds, in the sense that they will do the search warrant, they'll do the Stormy Daniels case. But in the meantime, if anything pops up in the search that's relevant to the Russia case, he gets the benefit of that.
And they're going through this guy's all his. Unless he's hiding stuff somewhere, not in one of these three places, his office, his home, and this hotel, they're going to get access to Trump's financial information, theoretically.
Anything that this attorney has, and my experience, Mark, is that agents are not particularly discriminating when they show up to do these warrants. They don't go through everything at the office document by document to decide what's relevant. Within big, broad parameters, they take pretty much everything, and then they'll sift through it back in their office where they have a lot of time to look at it and analyze it.
And if the President of the United States writes an email to his lawyer, or several, where he assumes they're privileged and confidential, and makes statements that can be used against him, they'll have those too, correct?
Correct. Now, what they'll do, in theory, would be they'll have what they call a clean team or a screen team that will have to go through all of the documents to make a first cut to determine if there are things that are relevant and that are potentially attorney-client privilege. And then usually what happens is Cohen's lawyers and perhaps Trump's lawyers as well would argue that out with the clean team, and if necessary, before a judge, right, before Mueller or the prosecution team in the Southern District would get a look at it. So in other words,
here's my concern. Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is what they try to do in most of these cases is litigate the attorney-client privilege claims away from the team that's doing the actual prosecution.
Well, and we know this is where Lawrence Wall screwed up with the Castigar. I don't want to confuse the public, right, but here's my concern. This is not going to end anytime soon, is it, Andy McCarthy?
No. And, Mark, I've never understood why people thought it might, because, first of all, Mueller is operating on his own schedule. He doesn't care about the president's schedule or anyone else's. And for those, even including some in the president's legal camp, who seem to think that, they could persuade Mueller to at least bring the Trump portion of the case to a close, if there's two indictments against Manafort, and he's looking at two trials, and those trials aren't going to be over till toward the end of this year, and the whole point of prosecuting Manafort is to basically squeeze him to see if he's got something on Trump, why on earth would it be wrapped up before the Manafort cases are wrapped up? I just don't see it ending anytime soon.
Here's my concern with what's going on today. We can talk about the legalese and the hurdles that need to be jumped. I'm sitting there, I'm Mueller, I'm thinking this is a backdoor way for me to see if I can get anything else here. That is, I will have access to the attorney-client information, we'll duke it out in court, but if there's anything with the word Russia in there, I'm going to claim access to it.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, Mark, and I think even wider than that, again, as we were saying before, if they have a theory that they argue to the court that the crime-fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege applies, what they'll basically say is he's got no attorney-client privilege. Mm-hmm. And that'll mean a broad sweep through these documents.
Mm-hmm. I'm troubled by this, Andy McCarthy. Are you?
Anytime somebody's lawyer gets dragged into a case, and in particular, when you have a situation where this looks like it's minor stuff and it's very far afield from the reason that we've had this investigation, and there seems to be no concern on anybody's part that it's an investigation that doesn't seem to have a crime, and yet it's making the President of the United States, it's making it very difficult for him to govern. I'd be very troubled by it.
And it is. And today, and we will play this, he really spoke out today. He said, this has been hanging over my head for over a year. After I got the nomination, there was never collusion. Now we get into all these other things. I happen to agree with him. I mean, if you had a special counsel like this for any other president, imagine John Kennedy or Lyndon Johnson or on and on and on. These guys could not possibly govern, could they?
No, and Mark, I have, to be clear about this, I have absolutely no problem with the idea that if you have a serious crime and the President of the United States is implicated in it, then I think it has to be investigated. But you need to have a crime first, and we've never had a crime here.
And this goes on and on and on. So now they figured out a way to move it in yet another direction. I don't think these guys are going to give up until they feel they've gotten the president. Am I wrong about that?
No, I don't think you're wrong about it. I think, Mark, that our history with these things is that the longer they go on, the longer they go on. You know, I mean, it's not like these things wrap up, you know, that as time goes on, things get narrow and then they close out. What ends up happening is, you know, one trail leads to another, and especially here where they have no parameters from the start. And
Andy McCarthy, they're in 3 jurisdictions now. They're in D.C., they're in Virginia, and now New York.
That's correct, right.
And you got the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, which is the biggest one in Manhattan. You've got special counsel who can basically tap whatever resources you want. What's he have, 17 assistant prosecutors?
Yes.
Something like
17
that?
in total, right.
17 assistant.
Just to give people an idea, my prosecution of the Blind Sheikh, we had 3.
You had 3.
It was a 3-year investigation with national security information and, you know, the biggest terrorism case in the country at the time.
So these prosecutors, and you got to figure there's, 30, 40 FBI agents?
At least, yes. Plus every lead that they sent out throughout the country. So, you know, ultimately, you know how they say, like when Bobby Thompson hit the home run, everybody alive was in the Polo Grounds, right? You'll be hearing that everybody worked on this investigation sometime or another.
I'm just how does the president escape this? And the distraction, you know, the Justice Department. I just want the country to know the Office of Legal Counsel, which handles, you know, some of the top constitutional issues for the Attorney General, the president, in terms of taking the official government position. They've written 2 memoranda, and these memoranda, Democrat and Republican administrations have said the reason you don't indict a president, and both of them said this, it's unfair to the American people. It's distracting to the president of the United States. Whether you and I believe a president can be indicted or not, that's what they have said. Is not an investigation like this. It's become a Hydra-headed investigation. Does this not do the same thing?
Oh, it absolutely does. And the other thing, Mark, which is unseen, but I think has been very problematic for the president, is it's hard to get talented people to come serve the government if they think they're going to have to lawyer up. And if they're, you know, if they think the administration's a risky proposition because it's under investigation, it becomes hard for the country to tap the talented people we should want in these important positions.
Well, look at everybody who's under investigation or being dragged in. Everybody from former chiefs of staff to former press spokesmen to his family members. It goes on and on and on, does it not?
It does. And I think that we would have a lot less heartburn about it if there was an actual crime here. But it looks like this is, from the beginning, it's been an unguided missile looking for a crime rather than a serious investigation around a crime.
The Washington Post is reporting now, Andy McCarthy, that Cohen is under investigation for bank fraud and campaign finance violations. Now, one can relate to the other.
Right.
In other words, if they claim that he made a fraudulent campaign payment, then you can throw in the bank fraud on top. I mean, you and I are speculating, but just based on the report, then you can throw in the bank fraud on top of it, right?
Correct. In fact, I think he's really basically done that with Manafort already. So, yes.
Mm-hmm. So they're throwing in possible bank fraud, wire fraud, campaign finance violations. So I'm guessing it all stems from the payment to Stormy Daniels, wouldn't you?
I would think so. And the reason they throw in bank fraud, Mark, is, you know, campaign finance stuff they don't even handle criminally usually, whereas bank fraud's a 30-year felony.
Mm-hmm. All right, Andy McCarthy. I appreciate you taking the time. I really do. We look forward to you writing this thing up at National Review.
Thanks, Mark. Good to talk to you.
God bless. I don't know, folks. This is very depressing to me. It's very depressing to me. I mean, the country needs a president who can focus on his job. Barack Obama never had any problems, never had to have special counsel. His attorneys general, lockstep. Didn't matter what he did at the IRS. Didn't matter what he did with Benghazi. Didn't matter what he did left and right, around and round. Nothing of the sort. And this is so completely and utterly out of control, and tens of millions of Americans are so disgusted by this, and yet there's not a damn thing we can do about it. And it is dispiriting, and I think we're going to get our asses kicked in the midterm elections. And if they take the House of Representatives, more subpoenas are going to fly, more investigations, coordinations with Mueller's office. It's really appalling. And the president hasn't done anything. As Andy McCarthy has said, if he said it 1,000 times, he has said, and many of us have followed, there's no underlying crime that launched all this. This collusion thing was a Democrat thing, a Hillary Clinton thing, a media thing. And you watch, the media are going to love this. They're just going to love this. They're not going to step back and say, hey, this is just too much. This is a bridge too far. Let me tell you what I think's going on here now that I see this Washington Post piece. Just to reiterate, the Stormy Daniels payment, they're claiming is an illegal campaign contribution. And therefore it violated the wire fraud and bank fraud statutes. And as McCarthy just said, that's a 30-year punishment. That's a 30-year sentence. And so they're trying to destroy now the president's personal attorney of decades that long, I think, in order to try and get the president. And I'm sick to my stomach over the whole damn thing.